and gentlemen, so for the third session, it will be on international migration. The moderator will be Nuno Nunes from IOM, and the speakers will be Mixed Migration Platform and CAPS, Dr. Alex Oldham, and Ms. Benedict Corrado from IOM, and Dr. Filippo Dijanev from Middle East Center, LSE, and Dr. Murad Hakim from University of Salahuddin. I would like to let the moderator continue and handle the panel session. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome from lunch. For me, it's a great pleasure to be here in Iraq. I've been following from far the work of my colleagues at IOM. My name is Nuno Nunes, and I'm the Global Cluster Coordinator for CCCM. It stands for Camp Coordination and Camp Management. And I do the same for DTM, Displacement Tracking. So in both areas I've been working quite a bit with IOM colleagues in Iraq. It is my pleasure to introduce a panel dedicated to international migration. We will start first with Alex Oldham from the Mixed Migration Platform. He's based in Jordan. Will be followed by Benedetta Corrado from IOM, based here in Iraq. After that, we'll have Filippo Dijanev from the Middle Eastern Center at the London School of Economics. And lastly, Dr. Murad Hakim from the University of Salahuddin. Without taking more of your time, I think we'll all be very interested in the presentations. I'll pass the word to Alex.
Thanks very much, Nuno. I hope you all had a nice, refreshing lunch break. And I'd just like to talk to you today about some of the work of the Mixed Migration Platform on turning back, which is essentially our policy analysis and a bit of data analysis of Iraqis who are moving back from Europe. So whereas this morning we learned a lot about Iraqis returning within the country, now we're going to have a bit of a look at those who have crossed international borders, regional borders, and are now in increasing numbers heading back home or at least to their home country. So very briefly, I'll start just introducing the concept of mixed migration, which might be a bit foreign to some, and why this particular topic fits within that theme. I'll explain our methodology very briefly, go through a little bit of the legal and policy framework, the numbers and the trends that we've seen of Iraqis moving back from Europe, the reasons why they might turn back, whether forced or voluntary or somewhere in between, and the conditions they face upon return. And finally, I'll just throw out some ideas on what's next, what we might seek to do in the future. So very briefly, the Mixed Migration Platform is formed of 7 different NGOs. ACAPS is my organisation, but others include Danish Refugee Council, Ground Truth Solutions, Intersos, Internews, Reach, and Translators Without Borders. And some of them work on information management and analysis. Others work on providing better information to people on the move, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and others. And then all of us, or to a certain extent, some of us really also push policy and advocacy messages out there to humanitarian organisations and to governments and donors. And as you can see on the map, our regional focus is the Middle East. For us, that's 6 core countries: Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and OPT. But we are interested in the flows of people. And they might start their journey in Afghanistan and come at some point through those core countries, for example Turkey, and end up in as far as Germany or Sweden. And so we're interested in a very broad geographic scope, but the core of it is the Middle East. And so why is this particular topic of Iraqis moving back from Europe interesting from a mixed migration perspective? I think the best way to approach that is just to basically sort of define some of our sort of core understandings of mixed migration as a concept and relate it to how this particular topic fits in. So for us, mixed migration, and there's various definitions of mixed migration and which particular people or categories of people fall within within that concept. For us, it's more a concept or a lens of analysis to more broadly understand the risks associated with irregular migration of some sort. And so, as I said, moving to, within, through, or from the Middle East. And so Iraqis obviously from the Middle East, and so if they're moving back from Europe to the Middle East, that's in our geographic scope. Iraqis have moved as asylum seekers. They may have moved perhaps for more economic reasons. There's a range of reasons why Iraqis might have moved to Europe, and there's a range of reasons why they might be moving back. And they might be people whose asylum claims in Europe who have failed, and they're being forcibly deported back. Or it might be that they are deciding to return, even having been granted a total legal refugee status in Europe. There's different groups who have different motivations and intentions, challenges, and it might be also another situation where someone who's been, an Iraqi who's been in Europe for a longer period of time, say since 2006, and some of the presentations this morning showed you really the extent of displacement within Iraq since at least 2003 and not just since 2014. And so people might be returning after an extended period of time in Iraq, or indeed they might be returning after having only just arrived in, say, 2015 or 2016 and decided very quickly that they want to come back. And then lastly, looking at irregular movement across borders, but recognizing that migration is never very often a very linear process. And people might move back for a certain period of time and then consider moving back again in the direction they just came from. And there's different statuses along the way between regular and irregular. And so it's different elements to this concept of mixed migration, all of which come out in the case of Iraqis moving back from Europe. So our study was essentially at this stage a secondary data review of information that's publicly available. You just have to log online and have a look around for it. And this is just an idea of piecing together what we already know as a community or as multiple communities and trying to bridge a bit that gap, say, between the academic side of things and the operational side of things by bringing together a range of different information sources. So we looked at Eurostat data, that's the European sort of statistics database that compiles statistics from all the member states in Europe, and some of their data on returns. We looked at policy papers, academic papers. We looked at the IOM's reporting on its assisted voluntary return and reintegration scheme, and of course media and anecdotal reports shed light on what some of these data sets and database reports mean. And the idea is to inform policy and programming, but also to identify gaps that will make future primary data collection more effective and more targeted. So some of, I guess, the findings from this review of the literature in terms of the legal and policy framework, the first and foremost legal rule that we consider when talking about returns from Europe is this idea of non-refoulement enshrined in the 1951 Convention and preventing anyone from being returned to a country where they have a fear of persecution. And that's basically enshrined in European law under the Returns Directive of 2008, and that's supposed to be implemented by all the member states to varying degrees in practice. There's also, on top of that, some EU-wide and bilateral so state-to-state agreements of return and readmission between Greece and Turkey, and now the EU as a whole and Turkey. Or another example recently was the EU-Afghanistan agreement on returns and readmissions. And then there's the national laws of each member state, and importantly the sub-national laws. So in not all member states, but some member states, for example, Germany and others who have a more federal system, the departments or the Bundesländer have responsibilities for a lot of these elements to do with processing of asylum claims and deportations or facilitation of voluntary return. An example of a national scheme for incentivizing and facilitating voluntary return is this Starthilfe Plus scheme in Germany, which basically offers a staggered level of assistance for people for Iraqis and some other nationalities to go home at progressively more attractive assistance depending on how quickly they decide to go back. And then of course there's an important role for Iraq and other countries from the region also involved in similar schemes in terms of, for example, embassies across Europe, Iraqi embassies across Europe helping Iraqis to obtain documentation that they might have lost on their journey to Europe, so they can have a single re-entry passport to come back and to facilitate that journey. So some of the trends we came across looking at the different bits of data and triangulating them is that since about 2014 compared to 2015, more people are returning from the European countries where there's data available to the Middle East, and among them an increased percentage are Iraqis, an increased number of assisted voluntary returns from Europe to Iraq implemented by IOM, a fourfold increase I think between 2015 and 2016, deportations, so forced returns after all appeals to asylum claims have been rejected, are on the rise, and there's concerted efforts in countries like Germany and Finland and Sweden to increase the rate of returns. And then there's at the border returns before people technically even get into the European, into the Schengen zone. For example, pushbacks reported at the border of Greece and Turkey, or now the inclusion of Iraqis into admissibility proceedings, which is basically to decide on whether or not someone had a prior first asylum claim before they even arrived in Greece. And lastly, there's also a really important issue which needs a lot more investigation, is people making their own way back informally, and probably even using people smugglers to help them go back the same way that many people use smugglers to assist them to go to Europe in the first place. So this is just some graphics illustrating those trends. It's a limited sample, but it can still, I think, be extrapolated to show a clear increase in the number of people returning by all means from Europe to those Middle Eastern countries we're interested in. You can see that Europe has basically more than doubled. Similarly, from 2014 data, we found 1.2% of Iraqis, but from 2015 data, that had gone up to 4%, and Iraq had moved into the top 5 countries in that particular data set. Looking at IOM's data, you can see very clearly the second line, almost a fourfold increase from that light grey bar, 3,600, to over 12,000 in terms of the number of people assisted to return home through this particular scheme. And then deportations have gone up in Germany, just one example, by 21% in 1 year. So when we think about the reasons for return, there's, I think, a scale that we identified, and we often talk about voluntary returns and we often talk about deportations, but while it might be relatively clear when a deportation takes place, how voluntary a voluntary return is I think subject to a sliding scale, and essentially we rather than pinpoint or generalize, it's more important from our perspective to explore and identify the range of different factors that might contribute and overlap together to build up a clear decision to return. And they might be individual factors, and we borrowed this model, being a data review, we borrowed this model from an existing one and applied it to the Iraqi case. And basically, there's individual factors within the individual person, whether it's their age or gender. You can start to analyze trends amongst those variables, or it might be other more personal but broader factors related to the family or social circumstances. It might be that a close family relation back in Iraq became sick and there was no one to look after them, and so someone who had been in Europe was then obliged to come back for family reasons. Structural factors both in the destination and in the origin relating to the legal status or the security situation, whether that's the security situation in Iraq, which we've heard a lot about this morning, or whether that's a security situation in a European country where there's reports of asylum centres being attacked by, or I guess right-wing members of the community who are anti-immigration. And so the security at both ends of the spectrum, and then policy measures, and some of them are related directly to encouraging returns or speeding up deportations, but others are perhaps related to slowing the inflow of migrants that have an effect, an implicit effect on migrants already in a certain country. So that might be, for example, increasing the number of people subjected to immigration detention, or restricting the assistance provided for housing or health to a group of immigrants. And then lastly, the last part of our study looked at some of the conditions that returnees face once they've made it home or made it to their country of origin. Given that we went over a lot of these same issues this morning, which apply equally to those who have returned from Europe and those who have returned from internal displacement, protection issues, basic needs, the debt or exhausted resources, and perhaps a lack of livelihood opportunities to compensate for that, different family or social circumstances, or we learned a little bit different religious and ethnic makeups of areas of return, psychosocial issues, housing, land and property issues. All of those are very applicable to internal displaced people returning home, and many of them are also applicable to those who are coming back from a stay abroad, and time spent abroad. But on top of that, or in parallel to that, there's, I think, a number of issues that we identified that are very relevant to those, specifically to those who have returned from an international displacement, international migration journey. And that might be indebtedness, not only from the pressures, financial pressures of displacement, but indebtedness specifically to smugglers. And I think on average, an Iraqi paid 7,000 euros, I might need to double check that figure, but 7,000 euros to get to Germany. So that's a lot of money. And indebtedness to, at least partial indebtedness of those kind of sums to a smuggler, or even to family and friends, can have a big effect on the situation someone such a major migration undertaking that may have involved separation and loss, death of friends or those or family, whether in the Mediterranean or otherwise, or separation from them, injury, physical injury, trauma, or witnessing trauma, and exposure to exploitation. All of these things we know go on to varying degrees on the routes that many Iraqis have taken to get to Europe. And so when they come back, that's not something that just goes away overnight. Upon return, similar issues of reintegrating into society that might be to do with feeling of failure or an interruption that was caused by the migration event, how to restart a new kind of purpose in life, and new responsibilities. For example, just to bring up again the example of taking care of a sick family member. That's something that someone didn't have to do before migrating and now might have to do. And then lastly, exposure. And it's a journey that exposes anyone to new ideas, new people, to new cultures, to new experience. And there's negative and positive aspects to that. And I think it would be interesting to explore more as we go further in this study to see how those positive aspects could really be harnessed for the benefit of the migrant and the benefit of their communities. So next step is to explore some of those issues with data collection, particularly on those informal returns, which we don't yet know enough about, to provide better information to people making the decision whether or not to return from Europe, and to advocate against prematurely encouraging someone to return before they've got that information that they need to make a decision, before there's suitable reintegration options available. And yeah, exactly, lobbying, advocating for return and reintegration to make sure that all those requirements of a durable solution of return are in place. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for the analysis of returns from Europe. And with your agreement, we'll keep the questions to the end of the 4 presentations. The next presentation is from Benedetta Cordero. She's one of my colleagues here in IOM Iraq, research officer in the DTM team, and she will talk about migration flows from Iraq to Europe.
Good afternoon. So my name is Benedetta Cordero. I'm a research officer for the Displacement Tracking Matrix program. And today I'm going to explain and present the findings of the research project that DTM conducted last year between 2015 and 2016 about migration flows from Iraq to Europe. So first off, I'm going to explain a little bit the rationale of this research project, meaning the background and the purpose. Secondly, I will give some information about the methodology before actually explaining the main findings of both the first quantitative and the second qualitative phase. And finally, I will give some information about what kind of conclusions we think we can draw from our findings, but also what further steps could be taken in terms of research. So, speaking of, again, the rationale and the background, as we all know, in 2015, Europe recorded a very high number of arrivals. It is estimated that approximately 1 million individuals arrived to Europe during 2015. And of these 1 million, approximately 7% was constituted by Iraqis, who were the third nationality after Syrians and Afghans. Now, on your right, you can see a graph that shows the monthly arrivals of Iraqis to Greece, which is quite representative of the trend of migration towards Europe during 2015. And as we can see, there is a massive peak, a very remarkable peak after the month of August. So the trend was not continuous, homogeneous. There was a massive peak after the month of August. And around September, October, that is when the DTM project started in order to research about this phenomenon. We were approached by IFID, who funded this research, and the purpose of the research was, first of all, to be an exploratory study, meaning that back then there was not a lot of information available about this topic. So the purpose was to actually test the ground, understand what were the main topics that could be relevant to go on with research, but also providing immediate data and immediate answers in order to implement programs that could be immediately address the needs of migrants, be they in the country of origin, in this case Iraq, be they en route. With regards to the methodology, there was an initial phase constituted by some preliminary stages, which were, for example, interviews with our national staff, in interviews with key informants such as local authorities. These were very important to actually set the scene and understand what was the real situation. For example, a very interesting element that came up from the very beginning was that, contrary to most of expectations, migration from Iraq was actually legal at the beginning. So people were living legally in the country, transiting mainly through Turkey, and only after that the journey became irregular. So this was a piece of information that we got from the very beginning just by interviewing, for example, key informants. A second phase was represented by a structured questionnaire. We distributed a structured questionnaire to approximately 500 Iraqis who were living in Europe at that moment. So through snowball sampling technique, so through chain referral, and thanks to our national staff, we managed to reach out to Iraqis who had left Iraq during 2015 and were in that moment living in Europe. So we literally interviewed them over phone. This stage allowed us to identify very important topics that we thought were worth further research, and these topics were better investigated in the second phase, meaning a qualitative one, which was based on 14 focus group discussions conducted across Iraq, mainly in the KRI and in Baghdad. I'm going now to show some of the main findings of the quantitative phase. So, as I mentioned, on purpose, we touch upon very different topics. So, for example, we ask information about the profiling of the sample in order to have information about the socio-demographic, the demographics, the socio-economic background, information about the location of origin, and so on. We then ask information about the decision-making, meaning why the decision to leave was taken and how it was taken. We then ask information about the journey, so information about the cost, the routes, the danger, and so on, and finally information about the country of destination. Because of time constraints, I'm going to focus only on the second part, mainly the decision-making process. I'd like to now draw your attention on two aspects of the profiling, first of all. So we ask our respondent what was their employment status at the time of departure. So we literally ask, okay, perfect, at the moment in which you left the country, what was, were you employed or were you unemployed? And 47% of the respondents reported unemployed, meaning that more than half of the sample actually had work the moment in which they were leaving the country. A second very interesting piece of information was regarding the security situation in the location of origin at the time of departure. So we asked our respondents whether their location of origin when they left Iraq was either under the control of armed groups or it was directly affected by military operations, of both. And it came out that almost 1/5 of the sample reported that actually yes, their location of origin was directly affected by the conflict. So let's remember these two pieces of information. Approximately 47% of the sample was unemployed and 18% was directly affected by the conflict. We then ask about the decision making, what were the most important two reasons that push people out of their country. So we asked them, why did you leave your country? And we received very interesting answers. So approximately 10% reported general security concerns, which was very surprising for us because 18% said they were living in a conflict-affected area. So we couldn't really understand why these two figures were not matching. 6% of the respondents reported unemployment as the first reason to leave the country, even if we know that 47% of them were actually unemployed. And an overwhelmingly 80% reported as reason to leave the country, no hope in the future. Now, we added this question to the questionnaire, so we knew from the very beginning that it was going to be an umbrella answer under which many came up really insistently, to the extent that in the pilot, some people were actually ticking other, not ticking any other option, and just adding themselves no hope in the future. So our idea was perfect, we can give them this option, but then we want to investigate anyway. So we gave them the opportunity to tell us what is the second step, what is the second reasons. But again, 1/3 of the sample didn't even give us an answer. And approximately 1/4 said the general security concerns, 1/4 said unemployment. So again, we couldn't find a match between the profile and the actual reasons that the respondents were giving for leaving the country. In addition to the push factors, so why did you leave Iraq, we also asked them why did you choose Europe, and specifically what were the reasons that led the respondent to choose a specific country of intended destination. So I would say approximately half of the sample had chosen Germany at the time of departure. So it doesn't mean that they actually ended up in Germany, but the initial decision was about Germany. And when it came up to what are the reasons why you choose exactly that country, these are the main information that we got. So 43% of the sample reported that the reason why they chose that intended country of destination was because they thought it was easier to get asylum, and 11% because it was easier to get the visa. Which means that overall more than half of the people actually chose an intended country of destination based solely on the idea that it was going to be easy to get a permanent residency. We also ask information about the difference between the expectations at the time of departure, meaning what they were expecting, what kind of services the respondents were expecting from the country before departure, and what they actually received. Now, of course, I will not go through each single point, but again, these 2 points, meaning the working visa and the refugee status, were actually expectations that most of the migrants had at the beginning of the journey, and most of them did not receive. While about all the other services, let's say cash assistance, subsidies, healthcare, it was actually the opposite. More people receive it than those who actually expected it. We then went more in depth and we asked, did you think before leaving the country to have all your cards to fit the eligibility criteria of the refugee status? And 94% of the respondents said, yes, before leaving the country, I was 100% sure to perfectly fit the eligibility criteria. However, at the time of the interviews, only 12% had received it, and 1/4 of them had been rejected. So again, there was a complete mismatch between the expectation of the migrant before leaving the country and the actual outcome once they reach the country. The decision-making process, so this mismatch, were quite evident to us, were extremely remarkable. So this is why we decided to continue to investigate especially these points in the second phase, meaning the qualitative phase of our research, in which we interviewed face-to-face returnees, meaning Iraqis who had left Iraq in 2015 and then later come back again to Iraq through IUM-assisted voluntary return and reintegration programs. We asked them, we touch upon the different topics. Here I'm going to report only about 3 of them, meaning we asked them about the push factors. So again, why did you leave the country? Why did you choose to migrate? The pull factors, meaning why Europe and why in that specific moment. You remember the peak of August. And finally, we investigated about the hopes, expectations, and misconceptions about the life in the country of destination. With regard to the push factors, meaning then the reasons for migrating, we received a kind of homogeneous answers across the country. So the answers that we received in all focus groups were very similar. There was a difference from a regional point of view simply in the order of priorities. So let's say that in Baghdad they told us ABC and in Kairai they told us BCA. But the answers were always the same. So the first reason was security. By security, this was very interesting. They didn't mean solely the conflict. We actually interviewed many people, many returnees, who were not from areas that were actually affected by the conflict. If by conflict we mean armed clashes between armed groups or the army. By security they meant also simply crime, the lack of law enforcement. So many reported, for example, about having a member of their families being kidnapped simply by a local gang without any reasons related to a specific political or religious affiliation. So the lack of law enforcement and the lack of security were considered exactly as important as being actually actually affected by the armed conflict as main reason to leave the country. Secondly, another important factor was the lack of equality and social justice. So themes such as unfairness, lack of justice, the unequal distribution of resources came up very often, WASTA in general, and in general political and economic instability. Now, what was very interesting about these interviews was that they were not really reporting any factors that are actually new to the country. Many of the factors that were mentioning were for sure exacerbated by the current situation, for example, the economic crisis due to the conflict, or again, the actual armed clashes because of the conflict. But in reality, they were pointing out, unfortunately, driving factors that have been existing in Iraq for decades. And they were very aware of this, so they were insisting on this by saying that their sense of hopefulness came exactly by the idea that the situation would not change. The situation has been like this forever and will not change. In order to stimulate the discussions, exactly because of these driving factors seems rooted in the history of the country, we showed this timeline. So basically, we put a reference between the migration flow that I showed you at the beginning and the major turning point of the current crisis, meaning in January, as you can see on your left, you can see that the beginning of the crisis was at more or less in January 2014, and it took 1 year and a half before the migration actually started and reached that peak. In order to explain this, so we basically ask, so why Europe? Because in the past, for example, during the sectarian violence, refugees didn't pour into Europe, they poured into neighboring countries. So we ask, why Europe? And why now? So why from August and not 6 months before? So first off, they told us there were no other viable options in the region because, of course, Syria cannot be appealing for a refugee. They listed Europeans appealing factors, so everything that Iraq does not have in their imagination, Europe has. So in Iraq there is no equality, in Europe there is equality. In Iraq there are no job opportunities, there are job opportunities in Europe and so on. Routes to Europe were perceived open. So this was for me, for us in general as researchers, very interesting because we were told that the way through the Balkans were perceived as less risky and much cheaper than the past. Because even if from our perspective the journey was of course very risky, from their perspective it was way less risky than if they had taken the same journey 10 years ago. And the same for the prices. As the colleague was saying, the average cost that we also assessed was between $5,000 and $7,000. 15 years ago it was $20,000. So in their perception it was less risky and cheaper. And finally, perceptions about European community friendly immigration policies. So we then came to the conclusions that, and the migrants themselves were very aware of this, that somehow Europe has been idealized, that they have built this myth of the Ikama. So we actually remarked that there was no clear understanding of what even refugee status mean. They were just after some sort of a permanent residency, irrespective of that being a refugee status, a working visa, or anything else. And of course they were extremely disappointed by the length and the unpredictability of the process to actually be granted this kind of status. Finally, just a few words about the conclusions and what we think could be interesting to further research. First off, we didn't find any form of direct, clear-cut correlation between a driving factor and between these driving factors. So, for example, socioeconomic factors and security factors are, first of all, intertwined and not mutually exclusive, which means that there is no black and white. There isn't just the refugee and the economic migrant. These factors are extremely correlated. The push factors were extremely layered, exacerbated for sure by the current crisis, but rooted in the history of the country. There was awareness about the risk of the journey, so people were very aware of what kind of risk they were going to face during the journey. There was absolutely no awareness at all about the policies regarding the asylum-seeking process and migration policies in general. And finally, other two very important points. We tend to consider migrants as robots who take very rational decisions, putting pro and cons on a scales, and this just doesn't happen. They are human beings as us, so they are, of course, their decisions are also influenced by their beliefs, by their expectations. recommendations, but the information that they receive by their network. And finally, all these factors, these driving factors that we identified in our samples were not time-bound. So this is why we think this data is still extremely valid now to understand, for example, the situation of the immigrants now in Europe or why they are coming back. So thank you very much for your attention. So these reports are available on our website, and there are also some printouts at the entrance. For any other information, you can contact the email address. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Benedetta. I always like these studies that you can send them. The next panelist is Filippo Dionigi, and he's coming from the Middle East Center of at the London School of Economics. Filippo will talk about policies of border control that Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan have implemented in the situation of the Syrian crisis.
Yes, thanks very much. Thank you very much to the conference organizer for allowing me to give this presentation. I should warn you that my presentation is probably going to be somewhat different from what you've heard so far. Being an academic, I have a little bit more of a theoretical interest in thinking and rethinking processes of migration. This presentation is in fact part of a broader project that examines the nature of the state in the Middle East with reference to the Syrian refugee crisis in neighboring countries. So in particular, I look at Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, and in particular, Iraqi Kurdistan as my 3 case studies. This is research that has begun 3 years ago, and I'm about to conclude. And in this specific case, I want to propose you a way of rethinking, of reconceptualizing the idea of borders, and especially borders with Syria, between Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq in a comparative perspective. And the fundamental concept that I would like to propose is the idea of border thinness, and in a few minutes I'll try to explain more precisely what I mean by this. I claim that border thinness is one of the factors that has created the conditions for a fast and intensive flight of people, especially Syrians and to a lesser extent Palestinians that were previously living in Syria, from Syria into Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, and as a consequence of the initial uprising and then civil war that began in 2011 and then continued in 2012, of course. Yet I observed that from a situation of border thinness, Lebanon in 2015, Jordan since mid-2013, and Iraq more or less at the same time, have subsequently changed the nature of their borders measures, and they added layers of restriction towards persons that were trying to cross the borders, and to those also already living in host countries. And I think this is something that perhaps relates slightly to what Benedetta was saying in the previous presentation, also in terms of timing. The policy that these states have developed towards Syrian refugees has progressively changed, pretty much the same time in which you have seen this push of migration towards Europe to some extent. So there might be some interesting overlapping there that could be explored at a greater extent. This phenomenon of border changing measures, in my view, can be captured subsequently, can be understood as the creation of what a French scholar has defined, Michel Auger, has defined the creation of borderlands. Borderlands are basically spaces, not necessarily territorial spaces, but spaces in which people is confined, and it's basically stuck on the border, let's say, from their country of origin, and then the place in which they are hosted as refugees, in this case, or as internally displaced people. And they are liminal spaces in the sense that they do not have a clear status, or they do not have a capacity to fully access the services and the aid that is provided in host countries by humanitarian organizations or by the local state governments, for example. And this paper basically concludes that trying to capture the nature of borders as open borders, as closed borders, or as relevant or as irrelevant, or as national borders or not, basically is an approximation, is an exercise that eventually fails to characterize persuasively the more complex nature of borders, specifically in this region. Instead, the exception specifically studies urban planning. And the idea is basically that of borders are not simple and uniform concepts, and instead are defined as constituted by layers of boundaries, and I hope the translators can actually diversify the two concepts of border on one hand and boundaries as constitutive element of borders. And I claim, and at least according to this theory, I observed that there are 4 kinds of boundaries that are constitutive of a border. There is a political boundary, a cultural and social boundary, an economic boundary, and then a physical boundaries. And all these layers are overall progressively constitutive of a border. And what I do, basically, in my analysis is trying to define the arrangement of a border as a thin border, and I define it basically as an arrangement of boundaries regulated formally or informally, so that a regime of flow of people and things is facilitated across borders. I know this may sound a little bit abstract, but the next part of the presentation will be basically about operationalizing these concepts more precisely in the 3 cases that I analyze in my research. So, the first case is the case of Lebanon, and specifically the border of Lebanon with Syria. Why is the Lebanese-Syrian border thin? Well, politically, the political boundary is very thin because Lebanon and Syria have shared for a long time a history of political interactions and antagonism. We know there is parts of the Lebanese politics that constantly interacts with Syrian, for example, politics. There are parts of there is the Syrian regimes that for decades, up until now even, has not recognized fully the sovereignty of Lebanon itself, for example. So the idea that there is an effective political boundary between the 2 states is actually quite controversial. The social boundary, too, can be to some extent disputed or at least rethought. There are cultural and social connections that cut across Syria and Lebanon, for example. Religion is one aspect, obviously, but also language, intellectual activities are very much interconnected. And there are even areas of Lebanon in which actually there are more Syrians living than Lebanese, this even before the beginning of the Syrian crisis. So as a matter of fact, there is a phenomenon of fuzzy borders to some extent. The economic aspect too is extremely important. Lebanon and Syria are highly interdependent economically. Lebanon is fundamentally landlocked by Syria, so any kind of economic transition that has to take place by land has basically crossed the Syrian border to some extent. And that established an important degree of interdependence in economic terms, of course. Syria has exported labor to Lebanon for decades. For example, there has been more than 500,000 Syrian workers in Lebanon for decades too. So as a matter of fact, again, the border is very thin. And also physically, the border is somehow undefined. Also consider that Lebanon and Syria have not agreed technically on a borderline between the 2 countries being demarcated on a map officially. So as a matter of fact, the border there is, again, is very thin. The same kind of scheme can be applied to some extent to Jordan, although not to the same extent as Lebanon, but also Jordan politically has interacted with Syria in a very controversial way in various cases. Syria has intervened in Jordanian politics, for example, in the 70s during Black September crisis. Jordan has played a role during the Hama crisis in 1982, for example, and even now with the beginning of the crisis in Syria, Jordan did play a role also in the domestic dynamics of Syria too, to some extent, right? So the political boundary is very thin too there. The social boundary in Jordan is not very much about, not only about religious connection, not only about language and culture, but also very much about tribal connection, especially in the area of Dara and the northern area of Jordan, of Mafraq, where many families have relatives across the border, and that has facilitated migration too. Again, economic boundary too is extremely interdependent. The volume of trade between the 2 countries is extremely high, and also the physical boundary, basically, there's physically no boundary between the 2 countries because it's desert, apart from for the northern eastern area where there is a massive berm that basically has forbidden up until now, has basically stranded tens of thousands of Syrians in the middle of the desert in the northeast. Then we can use again with this kind of scheme again to understand Syrian-Iraqi borders thinness, and this is what I'm going to do in the next few weeks while I'm doing fieldwork here. But basically also in this case we have a long history of political relations, very controversial ones between Iraq and Syria, of course. There is also, and we could go through various phases, for example in the 50s and the 60s, the relations between the Ba'ath, for example, the Iraq-Nasser competition for reciprocal influence in the overall Pan-Arabist discourse to some extent, and then again mutual interference since the beginning of 2003, operations of US and allies in Iraq, and then again Syria, the Syria events of 2011. So, and then even more importantly, since we are in Erbil, also the Iraqi-Kurdish connection is a very strong one with regard to Syria to some extent. So that basically are all factors that somehow renders borders clean and establish patterns of interactions across border that facilitates, to some extent, migration processes under condition of crisis. For the economic sector, for example, again, between Syria and Iraq, one important aspect, again, is to notice the degree to which Syria and Iraq are interdependent in economic terms with regard to trade, for example, across their borders. If you look at the graph at the top, you see that Syria is basically one of the main trade partners for Iraq. In 2005 was the 7th, then the 3rd, then the 5th, and then it became the 2nd. And then the 3rd and the 4th, and obviously with 2011 again, the figure dramatically decreased, obviously because of the crisis itself. But that means that that border is a very important border for trade purposes, right? So basically, what is border thinness? Basically, border thinness is the capacity to appreciate the fact that relations between neighboring countries can be extremely intensive in historical terms. And that borders, therefore, can be crossed much more easily whenever you feel, or you fit basically this sort of criteria that I developed just for the sake of analysis. You know, as long as you have a strong history of mutual influence or interference across borders, or if you have societies that have networks and relational geographies that transcend state and national territoriality, or if you have an intensive economic exchange between these countries, or if your physical border is not too challenging to cross, well, as long as you fit those criteria, then you have a thin border with a neighboring country. And if you have a thin border, that means that migration processes, even when they are about forced displacement, can be much more significant, much more robust and fast than we see, for example, according to a Westphalian model, which is the national territorial model that we mostly use in the West. There could be a counterexample to further reinforce this argument, which is basically looking at the case of Israel, which is a neighboring country, but the border between Israel and Syria obviously are not thin borders. There is a physical border there is no cultural relation there, and as a matter of fact, there are no Syrian refugees that went to Israel, of course, right? So that's a counterfactual way of looking at the case. Therefore, this is, just basically looking at the way in which a thin border performs during a civil war and therefore a refugee crisis such as the one in Syria. Basically what you have here is that, first of all, if you have a thin political boundary, that means that political classes will use their border politics as a way to project influence within the context of conflict. And vice versa, the political elites that are in Syria will use their borders as a way, and their borders policy, as a way to project influence outside in the neighboring countries. This is probably what happened in Lebanon, for example, where the refugee crisis is massive in terms of, in relative terms, it's an increase of 25% of the population. A thin social boundary facilitates, in terms of crisis, the production of narratives of hospitality and responsibility towards people that is felt much closer in social terms than how it would be, for example, in more simple national categories, for example. And political elites usually exploit this language as a way to justify a degree of reception towards refugee populations, right? So this discourse of religious responsibility was very popular in Jordan, for example. The Mustaqbal movement in Lebanon has justified the presence of Syrian in Lebanon as a way to support the opposition against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, for example. And I'm assuming that to some extent the discourse of brotherhood has probably appeared also here in Iraqi Kurdistan towards the Iraqi population, or towards the Kurdish population that was coming to Syria to some extent, right? So these are the kind of dynamics that emerge in cases of border thinness when we are dealing with a humanitarian or refugee crisis, at least in this case. This displacement is the part that I was already mentioning, right? Then there is a aspect of change, as I was mentioning. All these countries in 2015, in 2013, and then Iraq and the KRI in particular, in 2015, then they've changed their policies to some extent. So border thinness, contrary to the idea that borders are open or borders do not exist, actually points out the fact that there is a possibility to change the policies that have been adopted with regard to border management. I won't go into detail because I'm obviously running out of time, but there has been changes of policies. There has been change in registration procedures, for example, in April 2013 here in KRI. There has been change in immigration law in 2016, and possibly there have been, always all sorts of legal and political devices have been used to try to revert or control this policy. Also because the nature of the conflict in Syria was changing at the same time. Most neighboring countries thought or expected that the Syrian conflict would have been a short one. That was a massive miscalculation, especially in Lebanon and in Jordan, okay? And instead, a couple of years later, they found out that the conflict would have been long-lasting, or at least medium-term lasting, right? And that has prompted a change of policy and the kind of reception that was developed towards Syrian refugees. So, what does it mean that you create a borderland? Well, it basically means that when you change these policies, you basically create a gray area in which refugees are confined into a space of liminality, so-called, a space in which people is suspended in terms of time and space, not capable of integrating within local society, but also not being able to go back to the country of origins. And that is a situation that behind these patterns of displacement, and explain also the political framing of refugees reception in host countries, when it's about responding to a sense of responsibility, a sense of brotherhood, and when instead it changes in a forms of refugee exclusion and therefore the creation of borderlands. A little bit more of more pragmatic conclusions in terms of border thinness as operationalized for policy-making operations. It provides an analytical framework. It could facilitate forecasting to some extent. Whenever you spot a border that is a thin border, then you can operate in that way. And then it will also provide a way to understand the changes in terms of crisis response in a deeper sense, a more historicized sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Filippo, and thanks for bringing concepts that we were not so used to. It's very valuable for our operational minds. To continue still with on the more academic side, we will hear the presentation from Dr. Murad Hakim from the University of Saladin and the Kurdistan Institute for Research and Development. Dr. Hakim will talk about the characteristics of Kurdistan region migrants. The presentation will be in Kurdish, so I'll invite you to pick up your translation devices if you require them. Thanks. Dr. Hakim.
I'm glad to be here, and I'd like to present my presentation in Kurdish language, and I think it's only presentation in Kurdish language in this conference too. توی جنواتي إما لبارة تایبەتمەندەکانی کوچبەرانی کوردستان و کارەکانی کوچکردنی ئەوانە لە دوای شاری داعش ئەو شەپۆڵە کوچەی کە لە 2014 2015 دەستی پێکرد. سەرەتا باکراوندێکی پێشوویی بزانین کەی کوچی کورد دەستی پێ کردووە بۆ ئەوروپا لە دوای شەڕی جیهانی دوای شەڕی دووەمی جیهانی هەند ژمارەیەک گەنجی ڕۆشنبیری کورد لە هەموو پارچەکانی کوردستانەوە ڕوویان لە ئەوروپا کرد زیاتریشەوە بۆ مەبەستی خوێندن لە عێراق لە کوردستانی باشوور کوچەکە لە کوتایی شەستەکان و سەرەتای هەفتان بە گرۆپ دەستی پێکرد بەڵام بە شێوەیەکی بچڕ و کەم لە هەشتاکان و لە نۆتەکان ئەم کۆچە بە شێوەیەکی دراماتیکی شێوەیەکی زۆر زیادی کرد ئەمەش وەکو ئاکامێکی شەڕی چەنداوی 1980 هەروەها شەڕی کورد دژی ڕژێمی بەعس و بەرەنجامێکی جینۆسایدی کورد بوو لەلایەن بەعسیەکانەوە لە دەیەی 1990 لە دوای کۆڕەوەکی هەروەها لە دوای 1993 و لە ئەنکامی شەڕی کورد و کورد لە باشوور لە نێوان 94 تا 98 قەیرا و هەروەها سەرەتانی قەیرانی ئابووری و نەبوونی خزمەتگوزاریەکان لەو کات ئەم کۆچی بەکفۆڵ لە کوردستانی باشوورەوە بۆ ئەوروپا دەستی پێکرد ئەوەی ئێمە تەرکیز دەکەین لەسەر لەمەدا کۆچی کوردی باشوورە لە 2014-2015 لەم دوو ساڵەدا شەپولێکی دوێی کۆچ دەستی پێکرد لە دوای هێرشی داعش بۆ سەرهەڵێمی کوردستان و ئەم کۆچە لە نیوەی دووەمی 2015 بە شێوەیەکی سەرسوڕهێنەر پەرەی سەر گەشەی سەر هەر بۆیەشە وەکو زەنگێکی مەترسیدار بوو هەرێمی کوردستان و هەموو بە وەکو مەترسیەک تەماشای ئەم شەپۆلەیان کرد کۆچی 2014-2015 بەرەنجامی سێ قەیران بوو قەیرانی ئابووری کە لە سەرەتای 2014 دەستی پێکرد قەیرانی شەڕی داعش لە نیوەی دووەمی 2014 و بە درێژایی 2015 کە تا ئێستاش بەردەوامە سێمین قەیران قەیرانی سەرۆکاتی هەرێم بوو لە ناوەڕاستی 2015 ئەم سێ قەیرانە پێکەوە پاڵیان بەو خەڵکەوە ناکەم کۆچ بکەن کۆچی 2014-2015 یەکێک لە تایبەتمەندیەکانی ئەو کۆچەوە بوو کە جگە لە گەنجانی هەرێمی کوردستانی باشوور ژمارەیەکی دیکەی کوردەکانی ڕۆژهەڵات و ڕۆژئاوا کەرمیشتەجێی هەرێمی کوردستان بوون ئەوانیش لە ڕێگەی باشوورەوە کۆچیان کرد بۆ ئەوروپا یەکێک لە جیاوازیەکانی دیکەی ئەم کۆچە ئەوە بوو کە تورکیا و باڵمان دەزانی سنوورەکانی خۆی بە ڕۆی کوچلەراندا کردەوە و کوچبەرەکان توانیان زۆر بە ئاسانی بگەنە سنوورەکانی ئەوروپا و مەترسی سنوورداشتکردن یەکجار کەم بوو بۆیە نەبینی زۆرترین خەڵک لەو کاتەدا کۆچیان کرد و زۆرترین ژمارەی کوچبەرەکان ئەوانە بوو کە لەو ساڵدا بیرۆکەی کۆچیان هاتە مێشکەوە و هەر لەو کۆچیشیان کرد و 175 ئەو کۆچبەرانەش لە یەکەم هەوڵیاندا بۆ گەیشتن بە ئەوروپا سەرکەوتوو بوون و سنوورداش نەکرانەوە میتۆدۆلۆژیای ئەم توێژینەوەیە ئێمە ڕووپێوێکی ئۆنلاینمان ئەنجامدا لەگەڵ ئەو کەسانەی کە کۆچیان کرد لە ڕێگای تۆڕی فەیسبووکەوە نمونەکەمان وەرگرت پێمان باش بوو کە داتاکان لە خۆیان ئەوانەی کە کۆچیان کردووە وەرگرین و بۆ ئەو مەبەستەش هیچ ڕێگایەکی دیکە باشتر نەبوو لە سێرڤەیەکی ئۆنلاین و لە ڕێگای فەیسبووکەوە چونکە ئێمە دڵنیا بووین کە ئەوانەی کە کۆچ دەکەن زۆر بە ئاسانی دەستیان بە ئەنتەرنێت ڕادەگا و زۆر بە هەرە زۆریشیان لە ئەکاونتی فەیسبووکیان هەبوو لە ئەنجامدا 150 کەس وەک نمونە وەرگیران و وەڵامی ڕووپێوەکیان دایەوە ئەم کوچبەرانەی کە لە دوو ساڵەدا کۆچیان کرد چەند تایبەتمەندیەکیان هەیە یەکێک لە تایبەتمەندیەکانیان ئەوەیە کە زۆربەی هەرە زۆریان لە ڕەگەزی نێرن دوام زور بيان جنجن ولا خوار 825 سالية وان سيم زور بيان سلطن ريجي خيزان داركان لسطادة ديبرناكا چوارم زورينه كي زور بروانامي آمادهيم سلوتريان هيا واتا دبلومو بكالوريوس بينجم زور بيان يان دهاتيان نبو يان دهاتيان دهاتي نزل نخواره اوانه که الو سالدا لو دو سالدا کو چارتر چور بچوه چولات که اروپی وکولا چارت کدا دیارا رژه برژه کی برز رویا لسه ولات کرد بپلی کم آلمانیا بپلی دوام بریتانیا بپلی سیم سوید اینجا دوای اوانی شو فنلندا دی و هندی کولات وکو فرانسا نرویج جماعی کی زور کم رویا لولاتانه کردوه هوکارکان چی بود؟ بو کوچیان کرد یک کومل هوکاریان ریز کردوه لسلسل و سنورداری آزادی بیروراده لحریب کردستان لدوای او نافقان گیری سیاسی اینجا بپلیسیم سنورداری آزادی تاکه کسی نبونی عدالتی کمالایتی نبونی بتمانه کمی خدمت گزاری و تا دوای وقوه الى چارتکتا دیاره هلا 2012 رپرسیه کرا عراق کسی شاری گوره هریم کردستان اشتدا مناول سلیمانی دهوک بپی او رپرسیه درده کویتن که پوتانسیلی کوچ لحریم کردستان و زوره و خلقی که زور دیویتن حریم جه بهیدیتن ام پوتانسیل لسلیمانی زور برزه سطا 59 لدهوک سطا 30 ولا هولير لهميان كم ترى سطا 24 كبيكمان سطا 24 وشاري كبيكو هولير جلك زورا ام بوتن سال برزه او پیشان داد که خلق هریم بهیوان لچاره سرکردنی او کشانه که روبرویا کنندوا بس نقاب گیری سیاسی لنمانی گندلی لنادات مروری لخراب خدمت گزاری کار لديمقراسی لمافی بروف لآزادی لقش ساتر لهمو امانه بهیوان و بکرتیکی هیوایی که وهایان نیه بدهات خویان بویا بدوای هر شوینه داده گره که تزقاله که وای لیب دوست نوان و حولدن بوه بکوچ بکر لکوتای داده اگر کرتی بکنه و بچند انجام یک داده بینی کش او شکوله به 2014-2015 ل 2015 لنوراس 2015 مانگکانی 6 و 7 و 8 گوربونه که زوری بخویه و بینی و لحریم کردستان و هم لراگعاتنا رسمیه کان و لطورک ملایتی کان دا حلمتی که زوری بکره و زور لقباره خوی گورتر پیشان دران خالقی که ولی که کوچکه لحریم کردستان کوچکی سرتاسری بود لهمو پارتگاه کان لزوربین قضا و ناحیه کان اگر چی لهندک شوینی حریم زورتر خلقه کوچی کرتا هندک شوینی دیگه وکو آواجمان پیدا کوچبران بر ریجه زیادر لسه لسر چوار اتالبت مندیانیان هیا گنج بون صلبون نیربون و هر واقع خواهانی دهاتی کم خالقی دیوه که کوچکه انجامی سه غیرانی گوره بود آبوری شر و یاسایی که تا استا شخص غیران هشتا بردوام و هیچ جان چارسر نبونه کوچکه اگرچه کوچکه هوکاری آبوری را بشتن بلام کوچک نیه که هوکاری آبوری بالا دست بیدیده بویشه کوچکی تایبت بخوی و رنگ زور جواز بیت لکوچکانی دیگهی که لزور ولاتی دیگه و کوچ دکریتن و زور لبن او کارشتی کوچکی تایبت کوچکی آبوری نیه ناتوانی ناوی کوچی هزی کاری لیدنی کوچبران برای برز امو کاران دخنه پال کوچکیان سنورداری تغيير السياسي سنور داري هذا جاكسي نبوني عدالتي كبراتي نبوني بتمانا باب المحزان زور بيت كوجبراني كردستان دجنا ريزي كوجبرنا شعر زكان اواني كالا بواري كي تايبتي دا شعر زايان نيا وبيمان وايا كأما لأوروبا دا لإستاي أوروبا دا بيوستي كي زور بمجورة دا زكارة هيا كدا دستي كاري هرزانة وبو هندي كار كا رنجا خلقي أبين بأساني نيكا زيادة لسير سرچواري كوجبران وكلا انجام كان ماندا دركون آماد پشیمان نین لکوج و بیر لگرانا و ناکنه و امج لگرده و باکیشا زورانه که لیره هنو چاره زمکاوه بشی زوری خیزانه کان لیره یان همو خیزانیان بشی که خیزانه کر رزامن کونه لسر کوچی رولکانیان و هند بشی که زوری و خیزانانا پشتیوانی دارایشیان کردون هر بویا اوانه که ناچار بونا قرض بکن بو ریگا تنیا لسطابی استنام رید لکو داده ببینید که کروج بردوام دبید اگر چی آرامی ببید و لسر خوش بید چونکه او کارکان او کارانه که پاد بکوج برکان و دنه زورن بهزن و لإستادا كأو همو كيشان الهرين كردستان هن خلقي هواية با اپوزيسيونش نماوا كچاكسا زيك لسيستمي سياسي عاوري دا بكرير وهروها خدمت گزارية كان لأصلكي نزمدان همو أمانة وادا كان كوجبران بردوام منو أو مترسياني للريقا بين الريان كوچه هنايا سايا كوچه مدرسي خوي هيا إنسانيش تاقيد كنوا زور سپاس بگوید
Thank you, Dr. Aki. I was told by the organizers that now we would have between 10 and 15 minutes for questions. So